Week 11 is here, and the fantasy football regular season is coming down to the final weeks. There's 4 games left, and it is time to secure your spot in your fantasy football playoffs. You want to get in the top 6. You want to get one of those 2 bye weeks. And today I got you guys covered with my top 40 wide receivers in the tier list format I bring you guys every single week. We go through tier by tier. We tell you guys who the best plays are. But with that being said, let's go through the will they play tier. First off, Davante Adams, wide receiver of the LA Rams. He came down with an oblique injury in last week's win. Does sound like he could have returned to the game if possible. Again, they were up big. Didn't really need to throw him into the fire. But it does sound like he will be going with no limitations. With Davante Adams, he said to himself, you're going to get the same G that you always do. It does sound like the oblique injury is a minor concern. So if you have Davante Adams, we'll talk about it in the wide receiver 1 section. But there aren't too many better plays at wide receiver this week. Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons did not practice, limited practice in terms of his logs this week, and what's being described as an illness/back injury. At the time I'm recording, there's no real inclination whether or not he's going to suit up, but given the practice status, I'm going to be going under the assumption he does play. I'm going to be going under the assumption he isn't limited, but follow the reports. If anything comes out later today that, oh yeah, no, Drake London's going to be on a pitch count, or Drake London's going to be out for this game, monitor what happens, because this is the true unknown on this list. And Johnson, wide receiver of the LA Chargers, he actually practiced in full on Friday with what's described as a shin injury, and it does sound like he should be a full go for this week. And then finally, Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver of the Jacksonville Jaguars, 3 limited practices this week after missing week 10 with an ankle injury. It is a tough matchup, but if he is a full go, I view him as a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. Now the wide receivers that have already been ruled out for this week, Marvin Harrison Jr., he is dealing with appendicitis. He's going to be out this week, possibly for the foreseeable future. Darius Slayton listed out with his hamstring injury. Terry McLaurin listed out with his quad injury. Chris Godwin out with his fibula. Torrey Horton is listed out with groin and shin injuries. And then Rashad Bateman with his ankle is listed out for this week. On top of that, we do have 2 teams on bye. The Indianapolis Colts, the New Orleans Saints. If you have Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, Chris Olave. If you have any of those guys in your teams, I say this every week, but don't be the doofus that leaves them in your lineup. But now we go on to tier number 1 of my rankings this week. We'll start off with what I describe as the top 3. Puka Nacua, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jamar Chase. Those are the top 3 wide receivers in fantasy this week. Those are the 3 wide receivers I think you should find as the top 3 on basically every list. Starting off with Puka Nacua, he scored 20 points per game since returning from his injury, and Stafford is in MVP form. With Puka Nacua, he has scored 17 plus points in each and every game this season, and he offers legitimate spike week upside. He's the best bet of any fantasy wide receiver, and in my opinion, he is still the clear number 1 in these rankings. But JSN is on his heels. With JSN, man, he has been on an absolute tear of late. 20 plus points in each of his last 5 games, and he has done that in 6 of his last 7. I understand surface level, Rams, very tough matchup, but you got to give JSN the benefit of the doubt. This guy is a point-scoring machine, and this guy is the Seattle version of Puka Nacua. They are the clear 1 and 2 of my rankings. But if you did want to have Jamar Chase ahead of either of them, I wouldn't fight you much because this guy has been on an absolute tear. In terms of this game environment, 48.5 over-under, fastest projected pace of the slate, and he has averaged 26.1 PPR points per game since week 5. We just saw him post 23 targets and over 38 points the last time he played Pittsburgh. With Jamar Chase, he has taken a full new level this season with Joe Flacco, and after weeks of struggling with, Jake Browning, not really knowing what it's going to look like with Jamar Chase going forward, Joe Flacco has provided that stability, and this guy has taken another level. If he keeps doing what he's doing, man, 26.1 points per game since week 5 is extremely impressive. Again, it's all the ebbs and flows of the position, but if you did want to rank him at 1, given the matchup, given how weak Pittsburgh is to outside wide receivers, I would not fight you on Jamar Chase. But moving on to tier number 2, and this is where I'd classify as the mid wide receiver 1s in fantasy this week. CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Rashee Rice, Emeka Egbuka, and Drake London. We'll start off at the top, my Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb. This is the single best game environment of the slate. 50.5 over-under. Sharps are hammering the over. The biggest margin in terms of sharp money versus public money on the over is in this game on Monday Night Football. It's high stakes. The Cowboys, they're trying to keep their season alive, and I think they're going to be trying to score points in bunches. 27 implied points on the road coming off the bye week after we saw the Cowboys embarrassed in weeks 9 and 10. They have something to prove. They make that deadline deal for Quinnen Williams. This team hasn't given up on their season. And with CeeDee Lamb, he's averaged over 18 PPR points per game in his healthy games, despite only scoring 1 touchdown this year. He simply hasn't had his blow up, but to be honest, going up against a pass funnel Raiders defense, it could very well come this week. At number 5, we got Amon St. Brown of the Detroit Lions going to play the Philadelphia Eagles. Sunday Night Football, going to be a ton of fun here. Both teams big-time contenders in the conference. And although the game environment, I would say, isn't as ideal as you'd want to see, Amon St. Brown still functions as the engine of this offense for one of the best offenses in football. He scored over 20-plus PPR points per game this season, and he has been consistently great all year. When you combine that with the fact Sam Laporta just placed on IR, we could be in store for another 10-plus target workload for St. Brown, and he has scored 15-plus PPR points in 7 of his 9 games this season. At number 6, we got Rashee Rice, wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs. Very, very tough matchup going up against the Denver Broncos. I understand they do not have Pat Surtain, but even without Pat Surtain, this is still one of the best pass defenses in the league. However, Rashee Rice has basically proven he's matchup proof. 22.4 PPR points per game in the 3 games he's played this year, and he has proven touchdown equity in this Chiefs offense. He has operated as that Kansas City Amon St. Brown, and if he's going to keep scoring touchdowns at this rate, you have to be starting him with top 6 level confidence each and every week. But at wide receiver 7, we got Emeka Egbuka of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going on the road to play the Buffalo Bills. And with Emeka Egbuka, man, we finally saw him get back to the level of play we saw earlier this season. Weeks 1 to 5, when he was fully healthy, he was averaging over 20 PPR points per game. Week 10, we saw him healthy again. We saw 23.5 PPR points. This guy is an absolute stud, and he is the true number 1 option for an offense that we really like in Tampa Bay. With Baker Mayfield, we saw him get back to the level of play from earlier this season. You could really tell in the mid portion of the year, Baker fighting through injuries. Coming out of the bye, he looked very good against New England, and I expect him to keep that type of momentum against Buffalo. With Emeka Egbuka, he's commanded 34 targets across his last 3 games, and he has crossed higher than 60.5 receiving yards in 5 of his 6 healthy games this year. In this game, the Bucs, they're almost 6-point road underdogs, and I expect them to lean upon their passing attack. Give me the higher, and I think Egbuka crosses 60.5 yards yet again. And then finally, Drake London, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons. Again, very big caveat. We don't even know if he's going to play. Monitor his status going into Saturday. Again, I'm recording this about midday on Saturday. If anything releases 6, 7, 8 p.m., make sure you have that in your lineup, and I'll try to pin whatever I can. But I'm going under the assumption Drake London, he's going to play. There's going to be no snap limitations. And this guy has been an absolute target alpha. 48 targets in his last 4 games, and he is a top 6 wide receiver in PPR scoring this year. 23 implied Falcons points this week, and Drake London has scored 6 touchdowns across his last 5 games, and he has 100-plus receiving yards in 4 of his last 5 games. Sure, there is risk. Maybe he does have a snap count. Maybe we do have some reports that come out on Sunday morning, Saturday night. But in the meantime, Drake London is a high-end wide receiver 1. At wide receiver 9, we got Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. And look, it's pretty simple. I understand if you look at the box scores, you probably haven't been too enthused about Justin Jefferson, but he's commanded a 32% target share and a 43% air yard share. And J.J. McCarthy and him just simply haven't connected on some big plays down the field. We saw, for example, last week, Justin Jefferson touchdown pass hit him right in the hands, and he ended up dropping the touchdown. You add a touchdown to his stat line, you're probably looking at his Week 10 performance a little differently, and we saw the highest passing volume of any game that J.J. McCarthy has started. This is the second highest game total of the slate. The Bears, they are banged up. There was reports maybe Jalen Johnson would be back. He is already confirmed out for this game. What do you think is more likely of happening? Justin Jefferson finishing 2.5 points per game less than any other season in his career, or him simply regressing back to the mean? And I like to prefer the latter. A wide receiver 10, we got Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. This is the early mid-year game, 9:30 a.m. Eastern time kickoff. Make sure you set some early alarms. With Jalen Waddle, man, he has been an absolute stud since Tyreek Hill went down. And with the Dolphins in this game, they are implied for 25 points against Washington, who is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. And if you need any more validation, heck, Mason is starting him against me in the Flock League, which means he's almost assuredly going to blow up. A wide receiver 11, we got Devontae Adams of the LA Rams, the other part of that Seattle matchup. We know Puka, we know JSN. The next best wide receiver there is going to be Devontae Adams, and I understand people might have some concerns. He leaves last week early, dealing with that oblique strain, but like I mentioned at the top, it does sound like he's fully recovered, and this is a spot for Devontae Adams to absolutely crush, because I mentioned the game environment, but specifically with the coverages that Seattle plays. Because with Seattle, they are second in terms of too high safety looks, and they run it 60% of the time defensively. For reference, the Rams, They are number one in wide receiver usage against too high. And Davante Adams, as we know, big time touchdown equity in this offense. Matthew Stafford, he has thrown 4+ passing touchdowns in each of his last 3 games. And number 17 is going to be able to get his hands on the football. But moving on to wide receiver 12, we got Ladd McConkey of the LA Chargers going to play the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. And with Ladd McConkey, he has averaged 17.4 points per game since week 5. And in that stretch, he has scored 4 receiving touchdowns. The Jaguars, they are a pass funnel defense. They are missing their number 1 slot corner and number 1 graded corner on the year with Jordan Lewis. I expect these Chargers slot wide receivers to absolutely crush with no Lewis in the lineup. Ladd McConkey's been playing too well. Justin Herbert, we know what he's able to do in the passing game. And if Ladd keeps playing like this, he is going to live up to his pre-draft expectations. Now, wide receiver 13, we got George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys going to play the Las Vegas Raiders on the road. Even with CeeDee Lamb back, Pickens has commanded 24 targets in his last 3 games, and he is getting extremely valuable targets as that big X wide receiver for this Dallas team. As we know with Dallas, they love to throw the heck out of the football. As we know in Dallas, they could not get a stop defensively, and Pickens has showed that he can command volume even when CeeDee Lamb's on the field. Don't get me wrong, he is the number 2 on this team, but like Davante Adams with the Cowboys throwing so much, he is still getting wide receiver 1 level usage. He's had a 25+ yard reception in 5 of his 9 games this year, and he has done it in the 3 games he's played against top 10 wide receiver matchups, which is why I'm banking on him to do it yet again. Give me the higher on his 24.5 longest reception projection. Wide receiver 14, we got Nico Collins of the Houston Texans, and don't get me wrong, this is a horrible game environment, but Nico has been a volume stud as of late. 15 targets in last week's game with Davis Mills, and these Titans are a top 10 matchup for opposing wide receivers. Nico, he's a stud, and we have seen Davis Mills hyper fixate on him when he started in this offense. Nico's just posted 26 targets in his last 2 games, and this season he is averaging his most targets per game across his career. But moving on to the high-end wide receiver 2s, we got Rome Odunze, T. Higgins, Devontae Smith, and Zay Flowers this week. And we'll start off the top with Rome Odunze. He goes on the road to play the Minnesota Vikings, and he has commanded a 25+% target share in 3 of his last 4 games. 16.2 seasonal points per game if you take away that goose egg, and he has been volatile, but he is still the alpha for an offense that we believe in. With Chicago, they've had their warts on offense, but in my opinion, they are very much an ascending level offense. And Minnesota, for as hot as they started on defense, has seeded big plays in the passing game as of late. On top of that, with Rome Odunze, 9 targets, over 15 PPR points in the first matchup against Minnesota. While I do believe Minnesota is a challenging enough matchup to dock him to wide receiver 2 status, Rome Odunze has posted 2 of his 3 best games this season in the last 3 weeks. At 16, we got T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals going on the road to play Pittsburgh, and very simple here. T. Higgins, big time touchdown equity in this offense. 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games, and since Joe Flacco took over in week 6, he is averaging 19.3 points per game. This is the same matchup we saw Cincy absolutely dice up on Thursday a couple weeks ago. T. Higgins scored over 20 points in that matchup. With the Bengals offense, they lead the league in fantasy points to outside wide receivers, and the Steelers are the 3rd worst defense against outside wide receivers this year. Top 5 offense and pass rate over expectation, meeting a defense that sees points in the passing game. One of the biggest pass funnels in the NFL, and I expect Higgins to cook them yet again, so give me the higher on his 11.25 fantasy point projection. Next up at wide receiver 17, we got Devontae Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles hosting the Detroit Lions this week. And with Devontae Smith, he has averaged 16.8 PPR points per game since week 3. And in my opinion, he should just frankly be viewed as the Philly wide receiver 1 at this point. He's played better than A.J. Brown for basically the entire year. And yet people are just going to resort on talent. Like, to me, no. If Devontae Smith is playing better, Devontae Smith is getting this type of usage, Devontae Smith should be viewed as the number 1 wide receiver on this team, with the Eagles implied for nearly 25 points. And they have attempted nearly 3 more passing attempts per game than they did last season. Detroit, we know they're going to score on the other end, and they are a pass funnel defense, the number 2 defense against running backs this season. And then finally at 18, we got Zay Flowers going on the road to play the Cleveland Browns. He's gotten a 24+% target share in all but 1 game this season. And when Lamar Jackson has started, he has had a 27.9% target share and 74 receiving yards per game. This is a bad game environment and matchup overall, but the Browns are 3rd in man coverage rate, and the Ravens are 4th in wide receiver points against man coverage. On top of that, I mentioned that Rashad Bateman's going to be out for this game. To me, with Zay Flowers, he's the man coverage beater, and he is due for a big-time bounce-back spot. I think he gets there despite a bad matchup this week. Moving on to the low-end wide receiver 2s, we got A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, obviously, who played on Thursday night, Teteroa McMillan, Romeo Doubs, Khalil Shakir, and Tez Johnson of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll start off the top. A.J. Brown, wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles. We just mentioned his teammate, Devontae Smith. Yes, I do think Devontae Smith at this point should be ranked ahead of A.J. Brown. And really, anybody pointing otherwise just maybe doing it because they think A.J. Brown's going to be better. They think maybe because he's causing a stink on Twitch that all of a sudden those roles are going to reverse. Like, to me at this point, it's too optimistic to rank A.J. Brown above Devontae Smith, given the overall workload that we've seen. However, A.J. Brown has still had spike weeks this year. Sure, we kind of saw what it looked like, the ugly of it in week 10. But at the same time, going into the bye week, over 14 points and over 28 points in his 2 games prior. With A.J. Brown, obviously, we know the upside is out of this world. A.J. Brown, any given week, can score you 35 points, can score you 40 points in your lineup. The issue just, how engaged is he going to be? Is he going to be able to handle if Devontae Smith has a better game with him? Those are all questions that you have to have if you're an A.J. Brown owner. But at this point, I'm betting on positive regression, and I still think you have to view him as a top 24 wide receiver. Next up at 20, we had Stephon Diggs lock in going up against the New York Jets. 11 targets, 9 receptions, 105 receiving yards. He was fantastic, man. 20 PPR points despite not scoring a touchdown. And he is the number 1 pass catcher for Drake May. We're going to have to reevaluate moving forward. The usage has been inconsistent, but when he's on the field, he commands targets, and he looks great in this Patriots offense. Next up at 21, we got Tetairoa McMillan going up against the Atlanta Falcons. And 11.9 PPR points per game hasn't been great. Wide receiver 34 in terms of PPR points per game this season. But when we factor in the late season rookie upside, I think he should be viewed as a top 25 weekly option rest of the season. Because with Tetairoa McMillan, you look at the usage, and this is that of a legitimate wide receiver 1. 28% yearly target share, 44% yearly air yard share. We just simply need higher target quality because when we look at the overall utilization report, he is the number 17 wide receiver in utilization score according to Dwayne McFarland. We're hoping for him and Bryce Young just to connect at that much better of a level because I do think top 15 upside is in the range of outcomes for Tetairoa McMillan as we close out this season. At 22, we got Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. And yes, I am saying Romeo Doubs, not Romeo Dubs. Thank you guys for correcting me in the comments. It's muscle memory at this point. It's so easy to just say Romeo Doubs when you've been saying it for years, but shout out Romeo Doubs, man, because although he had a bad game in that Island game, people saw him, oh, that chest injury, like there was a lot going on going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, but ultimately, since week 4, this has been the wide receiver 1 for the Green Bay Packers, and it does sound like he is fully healthy after that chest injury. I'm going to trust the sample size, a sample size that's had a 26% target share and 15.8 points per game between weeks 4 and 9, rather than the simple week 10 performance that left the stink in your lineups. Because when I look at this matchup on top of that, because when I combine that week 4 and 9 stretch with a great matchup against New York, it's easy to fall back in love with Romeo Doubs because New York this year, man, 7th most fantasy points allowed per game to wide receivers this season. And like I was saying with Doubs, 5+ receptions in 4 of his last 5 games. And at 23 and 24, we got Khalil Shakir and Tez Johnson going to play that game. Tampa Bay on the road playing the Buffalo Bills. We'll just group these guys together. We'll start off with Shakir because he has been the guy that has been more consistent in your lineup. 7+ targets in each of his 3 games out of the bye week. And this is a pass funnel Buccaneers defense. He's averaging 12.1 points per game on the season. But since the bye week, we have seen 15+ PPR points per game for Khalil Shakir. And I do think if he has yet another good game, continues to build this momentum, we could be looking at him as a top 20 wide receiver rest away. For Tez Johnson, he has run 70+% of the routes in 4 straight games, and he is averaging 12.5 PPR points per game in that stretch. The Bills, they are a challenging matchup, but Baker, he looked fully healthy in week 10. Like I mentioned with Igbukah, the fact that Baker looked the way he did, threw the ball 43 times, 3+ passing touchdowns, this is a good sign for these Tampa Bay pass catchers. And as we've seen with Tez Johnson, he actually does have touchdown equity in this offense. People would think, deep threat, skinny guy, he's not going to catch a lot of touchdowns, but he has gotten a 36% end zone target share since week 6. And as we've seen, he has been scoring touchdowns at will. But moving on to the high-end wide receiver 3s, we got Quentin Johnson, DK Metcalf, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jordan Addison, Jamison Williams, Deebo Samuel, and Brian Thomas Jr. And starting off the top with Quentin Johnson, he had 10 targets, and he was back to his usual snap allotment against the Steelers. And while there is volatility, he is still averaging over 13 PPR points per game this season. And he has 6 touchdowns in his 9 games played. With Rondé Gaston, sure, his breakout, it has really affected Quentin Johnson, but he has still scored as a top 40 wide receiver in back-to-back weeks. So with QJ, sure, you're going to have to live with the downs. You're going to have to live with the fact that sometimes he's not going to show up, but at the same time, he has demonstrated his ceiling this season. At wide receiver 26, we got DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers going to play the Cincinnati Bengals at home. And he's been really bad in these last 4 weeks. There is touchdown equity here, 27 implied Steelers points, so I do view him as a high-end wide receiver 3. But the elephant in the room here, he has the toughest matchup on the field. Sure, overall, the Bengals, they are the worst defense in terms of EPA against the pass, but they have one good player. And that one good player is DJ Turner, who's expected to shadow DK Metcalf. With DK Metcalf, I am still going to give him some benefit of the doubt. Like, keep in mind, I just mentioned how good Pittsburgh's offense is projected. They do have the second highest over under the slate, and he is commanding 39% of the Steelers' end zone targets. He has been touched on or bust, but there is upside to get there this week, given how strongly they're projected. A wide receiver 27, we got Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants going to play the Green Bay Packers, and there is no Darius Slayton in this game, despite a tough matchup going up against Green Bay. Wan'Dale, he's been pretty much what you asked for. 11 plus targets in 3 of his last 4 games, and he is averaging 12.5 points per game this season. As a high-end wide receiver 3, he's basically just been consistently a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. He's been a top 30 weekly wide receiver in 4 of his last 5 games. Comes here at 27, he's been consistent, and you're going to trust him in your lineup yet again. At 28, and we're talking a little bit less consistent here with Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings going to play the Chicago Bears at home, and he is coming off his 2 worst games of the season. However, when you look at last week, he just commanded his second most targets of the season. So keep that in mind, right? Although he had one of his worst games of the year, he had 11 targets in that game, and 11 targets in most week. When you get a guy that can create big plays, splash like the way Jordan Addison can, more often than not, you're going to get more than 7 PPR points. With the increase in J.J. McCarthy's passing attempts last week, maybe we start to see this offense air it out a little bit more. But this is a very good matchup against Chicago, and even if the Vikings throw the ball, 30, 35 times in this game, I would expect both Minnesota wide receivers to be able to get over the line this week. A wide receiver 29, we got Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions going on the road to play the Philadelphia Eagles, and I just mentioned Jordan Addison, the take a target to the house type of player. Jameson Williams is the definition of that. And with Jameson Williams, he has done it in 2 straight games following the Detroit bye week. We have no Sam Laporta in this game, and we have seen a heightened emphasis on getting Jameson Williams the ball. Dan Campbell, he takes over the play calling in Washington. Oh, shocker, it is Jameson Williams' best game. This is a tough matchup as well, though. Don't get me wrong. I am still going to be patient when it comes to Jameson Williams. But if he has another big week going up against this Philadelphia secondary, you could be looking at a top 24 wide receiver option rest of the season. A wide receiver 30, we got Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders going on the road to play the Miami Dolphins. This is the Madrid game. I already mentioned Waddle. But man, Deebo Samuel, it's been tough, man. Another week, another letdown with Marcus Mariota as the starter, but Deebo just played his most snaps in week 6, and he did score a touchdown against the Lions. Look, I understand Mariota hasn't looked good. Miami, they are a run funnel defense, but Washington just simply has been unable to run the football. And they are actually the underdogs in this game. They are 3-point underdogs in Madrid, so we could see more of a pass game script for the Washington Commanders. Mariota, sure, we're going to need better play from him, but Deebo Samuel is the unquestioned wide receiver 1 on this team. A wide receiver 31, we got Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars going to play the LA Chargers at home. And this is a complete dart throw. I truly don't know where to rank Brian Thomas Jr. because on one hand, 3 limited practices. On the other hand, he's listed questionable. Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? Is he dealing with an ankle sprain? Is he healthy? There are so many question marks at this point. This is where I ended up landing on him. Again, if we have reports that come out later today, if we have reports that come out on Sunday morning, this is going to impact the Brian Thomas Jr. ranking. And if he is out, just swap his spot with Parker Washington on this list. Moving on to my low-end wide receiver 3s, we got Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, Troy Franklin, Courtland Sutton, and Parker Washington. We'll start off the top with the 2 49ers wide receivers, and I do prefer Ricky Pearsall to Juwan Jennings this week. Overall, great game environment for both of them. I mean, we look at the over-under, we look at the over projection, we look at the implied points for this offense. We love what we see for the 49ers this week. Nearly 26 implied points, getting your quarterback back. This 49ers offense is set to explode. There is target competition, obviously, as we know. George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, they're going to eat in the receiving game. But I do think both these wide receivers should be viewed as wide receiver 3s. We'll start with Ricky Pearsall. It does sound like he's fully healthy. It doesn't sound like he'll have limitations. And he has commanded 5+ targets in each game he's played this season. Juwan Jennings, he's no slouch himself, and he has scored a touchdown and 14+ PPR points in back-to-back games. Like I said, I do lean Pearsall, 5+ targets in each game this season, and I think he does it again, so give me the higher on his 4.5 target projection. At 34 and 35, we got Troy Franklin and Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos going to play the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, I don't know what to do with this. I have Franklin actually 1 spot higher than Sutton, the first time this season he has been higher than Sutton. And this is how I need to be treating it. Like, it's similar to the Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown thing. Like, Courtland Sutton, if you want to be viewed as the #1 wide receiver in the Denver Broncos, go and play like the #1 wide receiver in the Denver Broncos. Because when you look at the last 4 games, Troy Franklin has been used as the wide receiver 1. 11 more targets and 4.6 more points per game for Franklin. He deserves his flowers. I am going to be ranking him above Courtland Sutton, so if you have both on your team, I would go with Troy Franklin this week because it's as simple as he's been playing like the #1 wide receiver for a month. And then finally at 36, we got Parker Washington of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And like I said, if BTJ is out, he will be a top 30 wide receiver in my rankings. Probably settle in that 26 to 28 range. But, oh man, 26 targets, 10 plus PPR points in each of his last 3 games. And while he is vulnerable, if BTJ does play, does he lose some snaps? Kobe Myers could be more of a figure in this offense. But it's just impossible to ignore the level of rapport he's had with Trevor Lawrence, 24% target share, and 34% air yard share in his last 3 games. But now we'll rapid fire through these last 4 guys, aka the flexes. Rashid Shaheed, Michael Wilson, Xavier Worthy, Christian Watson. Starting with Rashid Shaheed, this is the lottery ticket of all lottery tickets. I don't know what his usage is going to be. He only played 34% of the snaps last week. But keep in mind, this is his 2nd week now going up as a Seattle Seahawk. There will be no Torrey Horton in this game. I get it. Bad matchup against the Rams, but these are the type of points we want to be chasing. With the Seahawks, we know they're going to score points. We know how well they use their wide receivers. And Rashid Shaheed has shown in the past he is a legitimate weapon in this Clint Kubiak scheme. We'll see how many snaps he gets, but there are not many wide receivers in this range with higher upside than Shaheed in this week. At wide receiver 38, we got Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals going to play the San Francisco 49ers. Elephant in the room. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. missing this game with appendicitis. Hopefully, for his sake, he's able to come back soon. But the next man up in Arizona is going to be Michael Wilson. With the 49ers, this also represents a good matchup. They haven't been nearly as good against wide receivers since Fred Warner and Nick Bosa went down. And with Michael Wilson, you're going to access 94% of the routes, 16% of the targets last week. You can do a lot worse in your flex spot. 39 and behind Michael Wilson, we got Xavier Worthy, the Kansas City Chiefs. And look, there's no sugarcoating it. He is the beta. Rashid Rice is the alpha. Ever since Rashid Rice came back to this team, he has alphaed the targets out of this offense. And with Xavier Worthy, man, like, it has been bleak. He has not scored a ton of fantasy points, and I really don't know how else to use him. On top of that, Denver, very tough matchup. The only silver lining for Xavier Worthy is that we saw 7 targets in 2 straight games before the bye, and the fact that coming out of the bye, maybe we see a heightened emphasis on feeding him down the field. And then coming in at 40 and rounding off this list, we have Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers going to play on the road against the New York Giants. 45 plus receiving yards in 3 straight games since returning and just posted his highest route share of the season. This is a get-right spot for this Green Bay offense. Really struggles against Philadelphia, but like I mentioned with the Giants, they are not nearly as good against wide receivers than the Eagles are. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below, comment your biggest start-sit decision. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, if you're new, hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to 100,000 subscribers. And I mentioned my entry in this video, the higher on Emeka Egbuka's receiving yards, the higher on T. Higgins' fantasy points, the higher on Ricky Pearsall's targets, and the higher on the 24.5 longest reception when it comes to George Pickens. You put all those picks together, you make it a flex, and you guys can tailor fade my picks today with promo code FSE. The links are in the description. But with that being said, peace out. Good luck in week 11. We got to secure our playoff spots.